Imagine you are sitting in your living room, just minding your own business. It is a completely normal day.
Right, just a regular afternoon.
Exactly. And then, out of nowhere, the silence is shattered. The police violently kick down your door. They swarm the place, completely overturning your life.
Which is terrifying.
Absolutely terrifying. They confiscate your phone, your laptop, your hard drives, and they just drag you away. And then months later, you are sitting in a courtroom where a judge sentences you to 20 months in a prison cell.
Wow, 20 months.
Yeah, 20 months. And your crime. A few random retweets you made years ago on a social media account that had practically 0 followers.
I mean, it genuinely sounds like the opening scene of some dystopian science fiction novel.
It really does.
But for Dr. Chen Jingwan, who is a Chinese physicist, that terrifying, surreal scenario was his actual lived reality.
And that is exactly what we are unpacking in today's deep dive. We have a really fascinating stack of sources to go through today.
We really do. It's a wild mix.
Yeah, we are looking at official legal documents, court verdicts, and this really unique set of AI-generated meta-analyses.
Right, specifically perspectives from ChatGPT, Copilot, DeepSeek, Gemini, Grok, and Quinn.
Exactly. All of these different AI models were tasked with analyzing this single, completely bizarre case. We're going to explore how a completely dormant social media account morphed into a major criminal case.
And how a physicist used, constitutional law and complex network mathematics to fight back from his prison cell.
It is such an incredible story. But before we get into the mechanics of how all that happened, we do need to set some clear parameters for you, the listener, about what we are actually looking at.
Right, yeah. We need a mandatory disclaimer right at the top.
You do, because the source material for this deep dive contains highly politically charged content.
Very charged.
Yeah, regarding the Chinese government, foreign policy, and various political figures, both left-wing and right-wing. So, we need to emphasize clearly to you, the listener, we are not endorsing or taking sides on any of the political viewpoints contained in these sources.
Exactly. None of them.
Our sole mission here is to impartially report and unpack the ideas exactly as they are presented in the original source material.
Right. Our focus is strictly on the mechanics of the arguments, the logic of Dr. Chen's defense, and the structure of the legal system as it is depicted in these specific documents.
Okay, so getting into the actual events. Dr. Chen was arrested in Kunming by the Xishan District Police, and the official charge slapped on him was, quote, picking quarrels and provoking trouble.
Yeah, and that phrase, it pops up constantly in these documents.
It does.
It's what legal scholars often refer to as a pocket crime.
A pocket crime.
Yeah. Essentially, it is a notoriously broad catch-all charge. Local authorities use it when a person's actions don't really fit, specific legal definitions.
But they still want to punish them anyway.
Exactly. They want to penalize the behavior, so they just pull this charge out of their pocket.
Wow. Well, the evidence they used to fit him into this pocket is what really stops you in your tracks. I mean, they cited a retweet he made of a July 25, 2020 post from the U.S. Embassy.
Wait.
They cited a retweet of a speech by Donald Trump criticizing communism.
Yeah.
They included a cartoon of an umbrella girl from the Hong Kong protests. And the most shocking piece of evidence was a cartoon depicting Chinese President Xi Jinping kneeling to Trump.
But here's the thing. The documents show Dr. Chen never posted that.
Right. He never retweeted it at all.
No, it was simply found in the cache of his old phone.
Which is just crazy. And we should probably clarify what that means technically for the listener, because it's crucial.
Yeah, definitely. So a phone cache is just temporary data. Your web browser saves it automatically to help web pages load faster in the future.
So you don't actively click save or download or anything like that?
No, not at all. Just passively scrolling past an image on a timeline, or even having a web page load an image in the background.
Yeah.
That can just dump it right into your cache.
So think about your own phone cache right now. If someone seized your device and pulled every single image your browser passively saved while you were just, mindlessly scrolling the internet, you would probably have hundreds of images you didn't even know were there.
Oh, thousands, probably.
Right. He was arrested for the digital equivalent of accidentally glancing at a controversial poster on the street.
It's a great way to put it.
And it gets even more absurd when you look at his actual influence online. I mean, we were talking about fewer than 100 followers on Twitter.
And the analytics suggest most of those were just automated bots anyway.
Exactly. Over the course of 20 years on social media, he had retweeted fewer than 100 times.
20 years.
Yep.
Less than 100 retweets.
Yeah. Yet, despite this complete lack of reach, he was subjected to a closed-door trial His family was barred from attending, he was denied the basic right to self-defense, and he was sentenced to 20 months in prison.
It's just staggering.
Yeah.
And the legal reasoning the court used to justify this is where the documents get incredibly alarming.
Yeah, break that down for us.
So to convict someone of picking quarrels and provoking trouble online, the legal standard requires two main pillars.
Okay, two-pillar.
First, subjective intent, meaning you actively knew you were spreading false rumors.
Right.
And second, a resulting severe public order disruption.
Okay, let's unpack this, because this is where I really need to push back on the court's narrative here.
Yeah, please go.
How could the court possibly prove he had subjective intent to spread rumors if the content was literally just sitting passively in a phone cache?
Right.
Or, on the second pillar, how do they prove that an account with zero real engagement caused severe public order disruption? I mean, it's like whispering in an empty forest and being accused of starting a massive citywide riot.
That's exactly it. And the short answer is they couldn't prove it. The prosecution had zero physical evidence of any public order disruption.
None at all.
None. So to bridge that gap, the judge used a logical leap that, frankly, completely violates basic legal principles. The ruling explicitly stated that because Dr. Chen holds a PhD and has a, quote, high level of education, he should have known the posts were false information.
Wait. They used his intelligence against him.
Yep.
So being smart makes you automatically guilty of having malicious intent.
That is the exact mechanism they used. The court equated cognitive ability with criminal intent.
That is wild.
Yeah, in the legal analyses provided in our sources, this is flagged as a massive red flag. It is a guilty presumption based on identity.
Based on identity.
Right. It's a concept called objective imputation. Basically blaming you not for what you actually did or intended to do, but for who you are expected to be based on your social or educational status.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's a direct violation of the presumption of innocence. And it directly contradicts Article 35 of the Chinese Constitution, which guarantees freedom of speech.
That sets a terrifying precedent. If you have a degree, you are automatically presumed to have criminal intent just by observing information.
Exactly.
But, sitting in that prison cell, facing that kind of circular logic, Dr. Chen didn't fold. He didn't write a standard appeal letter begging for leniency or apologizing or anything like that.
No, far from it. He went on a massive counteroffensive.
He really did.
From his cell, he drafted a document he titled A Blood Letter of Defense and Accusation from Prison.
What a title.
Right. He didn't just argue he didn't break the rules. He put the rule book itself on trial. He explicitly called the local authorities a judicial mafia.
Judicial mafia, yeah.
And he elevated his situation from a tiny local legal dispute in Kunming to this sweeping critique of national policy and international relations.
And he structured his counterattack by going straight to the top. I mean, The first major argument in his blood letter focuses on diplomacy.
Right.
Dr. Chen argued that arresting him for simply reading and retweeting foreign speech actually violates China's own macroeconomic policy.
Yeah, this is brilliant.
He points specifically to a high-level strategic concept pushed by the Chinese government called the Community of Common Destiny.
Which is all about cross-cultural exchange, right?
Exactly. It's meant to encourage cross-cultural exchange, openness, and civilization diversity. So he was exposing severe structural hypocrisy.
Yeah, he basically asked the system, how can you broadcast to the global stage that you're an open, tolerant society engaged in global dialogue while simultaneously locking up your own citizen for quietly reading a foreign embassy's tweet?
Right. I understand the philosophical point he's making there, but let me play the skeptic for a second.
Okay, go for it.
If I'm sitting in a local jail cell, bringing up a massive abstract macroeconomic policy like the Community of Common Destiny just seems kind of disconnected. How does a macro policy actually provide legal leverage for a guy fighting a local police charge?
Well, it provides leverage by boxing the local authorities into a political corner.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, by citing the central government's core diplomatic philosophy, Chen is essentially threatening to expose the local Xishan district police as being in defiance of the central government's stated goals.
Oh, I see.
He's telling them, if you punish me, you are contradicting Beijing's official global narrative. It's a very calculated political wedge.
That makes perfect sense. Wow. And from diplomacy, he moves into something even deeper. His second argument is purely epistemological.
Yes, the epistemology argument.
Yeah, he attacks the sheer absurdity of a court labeling opinions as rumors.
Right, because the prosecution's entire case rested on labeling things like a Trump speech or a political cartoon as false information.
Yeah.
And Chen pointed out a fundamental flaw in that logic. Opinions, value judgments, and academic debates, they just do not possess a binary true or false metric.
Right. You cannot fact-check a political cartoon about the Hong Kong protests. It's a perspective, not a mathematical equation.
Exactly. And the documents emphasize Chen's argument that by criminalizing academic and political debate, the court was destroying the epistemological foundation of policy making itself.
That is a huge claim.
It is, but think about it. If a legal system erases the ability of intellectuals to discuss complex, uncomfortable, or opposing ideas, it basically destroys a society's ability to self-correct.
Right.
If scientists can't observe different perspectives without fear of arrest, bad policies just become permanent because no one is allowed to hypothesize an alternative.
It's essentially outlawing the scientific method in the public sphere.
Pretty much.
And then he brings in this concept of cyber sovereignty, which is just fascinating.
Oh, yeah.
He points out that by judging the truthfulness of a foreign official, like the U.S. president speaking on a foreign platform like Twitter, these local Kunming police officers were essentially acting as an international tribunal.
Which is ridiculous, right?
Completely. So the local police acting as international truth police is like a neighborhood HOA president trying to issue a parking ticket to a foreign ambassador.
That analogy perfectly captures the absurdity of the jurisdiction overreach. The local police were stepping way outside their mandate.
Yeah.
They were effectively judging foreign diplomatic speech, which, risks international friction.
Right.
They were trying to enforce a local standard on a global ecosystem.
But let me ask the practical question here. We are reading these brilliant philosophical arguments.
Yeah.
Does this defense actually hold up legally in that system? Or is it just a conceptually brilliant flex from a very smart guy who knows he's already lost?
Well, the meta-analyses in our sources, particularly from models like Gemini and Grok, they suggest it is conceptually ironclad, but practically doomed.
Doomed, yeah.
Yeah, at the grassroots level, a local Chinese court is highly unlikely to accept an international law defense or a macro-diplomacy argument in routine criminal trial. The local courts are focused on maintaining local order, not debating epistemology.
Makes sense.
However, politically, Chen's logic is devastating. It beautifully exposes the massive, glaring contradiction between China's high-level international posturing of openness and the rigid, often arbitrary suppression happening at the grassroots enforcement level.
So he dismantled them philosophically. But we have to remember who we are dealing with here. Dr. Chen is a physicist who specializes in nonlinear complex systems.
Right.
And this brings us to what I think is the most mind-bending part of the documents. Here's where it gets really interesting.
Oh, yeah, it gets wild here.
He didn't stop at philosophy. He brought hard science into the courtroom. He used his specific expertise to mathematically destroy the prosecution's claim that his retweets caused severe public order disruption.
Yeah, this is where the case transitions from a brilliant legal defense to something historically unique. Chen deployed two specific mathematical frameworks to prove his innocence.
Okay, what were they?
The Galton-Watson branching process and scale-free network theory.
All right, let's make sure we ground those concepts for the listener. Let's start with scale-free networks. How do we visualize that without needing a whiteboard?
Okay. Think of a scale-free network like the global airline industry.
Okay.
You have a few massive, heavily trafficked hubs like JFK in New York or Heathrow in London that have thousands of connections.
Right.
But then you have millions of tiny regional dirt runways in the middle of nowhere that only see 1 or 2 flights a year.
Got it.
The internet works the exact same way. Some accounts are massive hubs with millions of followers, and others are isolated runways. Chen mathematically proved that his Twitter account wasn't a hub. It was a dirt runway in the middle of a desert.
I love that. And that leads into the Galton-Watson process, right?
Yes. So the Galton-Watson process is essentially a mathematical model originally used to calculate the probability of a family name dying out over generations based on how many children each person has.
Oh.
In network physics, we use this to track how a piece of information spreads. The key metric is the branching ratio, which simply means for every one person who shares a post, how many new people actually see it and share it again.
So Chen takes his analytics. He shows he has under 100 followers, mostly bots, and 0 real engagement. He proves that his branching ratio was way, way below 1.
Exactly. In physics terminology, he proved he was a long-tail edge node.
Long tail edge node.
Yeah, when a node's branching ratio is less than 1, the system exists in what is called a deep subcritical state. This means the extinction probability of his retweets was nearly 100%.
Wow.
The literal microsecond he hit retweet, the information died. It didn't spread. It was instantly absorbed by the internet's background noise.
That is brilliant.
By mapping this out, he mathematically proved that his actions had absolutely zero physical capability of causing the severe public order disruption the prosecution claimed.
I love that he brought receipts from the laws of physics. But I have to push back with a common argument here. We've all heard of the butterfly effect, right?
All right.
The idea that a butterfly flapping its wings in Brazil can set off a cascading chain of events that creates a tornado in Texas. Couldn't the prosecution just argue that even a zero engagement retweet from a dirt runway account could be the butterfly wing that eventually sets off an avalanche of social unrest?
It's the exact counter-argument you would expect a prosecutor to make, and Chen anticipated it beautifully.
He did.
Yeah, he used the laws of complex systems to counter the butterfly effect argument. The physics of a systemic avalanche, or the butterfly effect, dictate that a tiny input can only cause a massive disruption if the system is already in a supercritical state.
Meaning what, exactly?
Meaning the environment is already so incredibly unstable and fragile that it is teetering on the absolute brink of total collapse.
So the environment is to blame, not the trigger.
Precisely. Chen argued that if Chinese society is genuinely so fragile that a single retweet with zero engagement can cause the entire public order to collapse, then the systemic instability itself is the root cause of the chaos, not the individual edge node.
That is such a powerful flip.
It is. Accusing him of causing the chaos is a logical fallacy. It's a category error.
Right.
It would be exactly like blaming a single pedestrian crossing the street for causing a citywide traffic jam that was actually caused by decades of terrible, fragile urban planning.
That is a perfect analogy. He didn't just argue he didn't start the fire. He proved there was no oxygen in the room for a fire to even exist.
Exactly.
But of course, the local court in Kunming ignored the math. They sentenced him anyway.
Yeah.
But the story doesn't end there, because the AI models we fed this case into did not ignore the math. Let's dig into the AI consensus, because this is where the meta-analysis gets really fascinating.
Yes.
We have 6 different large language models: ChatGPT, Copilot, DeepSeek, Gemini, Grok, and Qwen. We essentially use them as an ultimate objective appellate court.
And what is truly remarkable here is the absolute unanimity among them. We are talking about 6 entirely different architectures, developed by different companies across different countries.
And we really need to pause on why that is so significant. Let's look at the how and why of these AI models. A model like ChatGPT or Gemini is developed in the US, right?
Right.
But models like Qwen and DeepSeek are developed in China. Chinese models are subject to incredibly strict RLHF.
Reinforcement learning from human feedback, yeah.
Exactly. Which means they are heavily programmed with guardrails to align with Chinese state narratives.
That is exactly the friction point. You have models designed specifically not to criticize the Chinese state apparatus. Yet when they independently audited the legal documents in Dr. Chen's defense, even the heavily censored Chinese AIs had to acquit him.
That is wild.
Yeah, they universally agreed that Dr. Chen's defense was logically, scientifically, and philosophically sound, and that the local court's actions were severely flawed.
So how do machines overcome their own political programming to look at this human mess? Like, how did Qwen and Copilot break down the case?
They bypassed the politics and focused entirely on the structural logic. Qwen and Copilot both pointed out the complete lack of a causal chain.
Okay.
The prosecution suffered from what the AIs termed a reference failure.
Oh, reference failure.
Yeah, the court was claiming a specific result, severe public chaos, without providing a single shred of physical or statistical evidence that the chaos actually happened in reality.
Right, there was no riot.
Exactly. The math left no logical room for guilt. You can't convict someone of arson if you can't prove a fire ever existed.
And that lack of physical evidence ties directly into the broader societal impact. I mean, I have to imagine that if I'm a scientist or an academic watching a peer get 20 months in prison for a phone cache, I'm immediately scrubbing my hard drives and putting my head down.
You just hit on exactly what the DeepSeek model flagged.
Oh, really?
Yeah, DeepSeek highlighted the spillover effect of this kind of judicial overreach. The AI warned that cases like this create a massive chilling effect on intellectuals.
Right, because everyone is terrified.
Exactly. If scientists and scholars are terrified to even observe or collect foreign data, it kills domestic innovation and actively damages the nation's international image.
Which circles right back to Chen's argument about destroying the foundation of policymaking. And Gemini took a similar philosophical angle, didn't it?
It did. Gemini praised the sheer depth of Chen's argument regarding the fatal flaw of the court's binary thinking. The AI recognized that using a black-and-white fact versus rumor judgment to replace the complex, nuanced understanding of opinions and ideas is a fundamental breakdown of the justice system.
Right.
Punishing ideas as if they were fake news destroys the cognitive framework of a society.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? I mean, why should someone prepping for a meeting or doing the dishes halfway across the world care that a bunch of computer algorithms agreed with a physicist in a Kunming prison?
It matters deeply because it proves the universal nature of logic and evidence.
Yeah.
Justice isn't just a cultural concept or local preference. It is fundamentally tied to objective reality. The AI consensus shows us that when a legal system abandons objective reality, when it throws out measurable data, mathematical probability, and physical evidence in favor of arbitrary labels, it ceases to be a justice system.
He just becomes power.
Exactly. When a court assumes a highly educated person must be guilty based purely on identity, it becomes nothing more than a tool of arbitrary power. Dr. Chen's case serves as a stark, mathematically proven warning about what happens when institutions divorce themselves from the basic laws of cause and effect.
It is just an incredible journey. We've gone from a bogus arrest over a few unnoticed retweets sitting in a phone cache to an absolute masterclass in constitutional law, network topology, and epistemology.
It's been wild.
It really highlights the enduring power of critical thinking. When you actually understand how systems work, whether that is the legal framework of a nation or the physics of a digital network, you can mathematically prove the absurdity of arbitrary rules. Dr. Chen used the laws of the universe to expose the deep flaws in the laws of men.
And, the documents leave us with a really profound question about the nature of knowledge itself.
Yeah.
Throughout this entire ordeal, we saw a governing system attempt to criminalize the mere act of observing.
Yeah, just looking.
Dr. Chen was punished not for acting, but for collecting different viewpoints, even if he only held them privately in a temporary folder on his device.
Which brings up a genuinely chilling thought to end on, one that builds on everything we've unpacked today.
Yeah.
If a governing system can criminalize the mere act of observing or collecting different viewpoints, if the system can make it illegal just to hold an idea in your digital cache, at what point does human curiosity itself become a crime?
Wow.
And if the simple pursuit of knowledge is mathematically penalized by the state, how can any society hope to innovate, adapt, or even survive the future?
I mean, a system that outlaws curiosity is a system that has decided it can no longer afford to grow.
Something to mull over the next time you clear your browser history. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking questions, keep observing, and we will catch you next time.